Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. On the surface, the Resistance and the Rebellion look quite similar. X-Wings, check. Mon Cala warships, check. Lightsaber-wielding hero unit from Desert Planet, check. Militaristic and authoritarian space fascist enemies, check. Some would argue that the Resistance is a cheap imitation of the Rebellion. Even their flight suits are a shade off. But if you get to intimately understand an organization like the Rebellion or the Resistance, it becomes harder and harder to confuse them for the same thing. In reality, the Resistance is a very different organization that is fighting a very different enemy in a very different type of galaxy. The Rebellion was a reactionary movement. It was made up of several groups of dissidents who had their own individual beefs with the Empire. You had organizations like Saw Gerrera's partisans. Saw Gerrera had first gotten a taste of guerrilla warfare fighting against the Separatist occupation of his homeworld, Onderon. From the beginning, he clearly enjoyed fighting. The death of his more level-headed sister Stila left him unchecked and propelled him headfirst into a life full of killing and violence. Somewhere along the way, he completely forgot about what he was fighting for in the first place. And he also began attracting like-minded individuals who also had a single-minded focus on creating chaos and destruction. Then you had groups like the ones led by Mon Mothma or Bail Organa. Former senators of the soon-to-be defunct Galactic Senate, they had been there for the fall of the Republic and the rise of the New Order. They had seen Palpatine's brilliant political maneuvers and the fear and chaos that fed his ascension to dictator of the known galaxy. They had tried to use the systems of government that were designed to contain someone like him, the checks and balances that were supposed to stop the executive from destroying the other government branches. They had refrained from open rebellion because they were representatives of billions of people and in charge of their safety and security. And so they quietly gathered arms and stashed equipment, established a trusted network of colleagues and agents who shared similar views on the Empire. They secretly upgraded their diplomatic ships with additional firepower, shield generators, and stashes of emergency supplies. Some of these politicians knew exactly what war looked like. They had fought in the Clone Wars. Most wanted to avoid bloodshed as much as possible. Others, like the Mon Calamari led by military fishmen, like Admiral Raddus and Captain Akbar, were fully prepared and well equipped to face the Empire in open battle. They had the discipline, the will, and firepower to fight as regulars. Their arrival and boldness opened up new options for the Alliance to restore the Republic. But just days before the Battle of Yavin, the Alliance still had not really been tested. They were more of a loose coalition of dissident groups with their own specialties and goals that made decisions in a very loose council, which naturally meant that no decisions were ever made. While democracy works great in a stable government system where the whole point is to avoid revolution, rapid change, and chaos, on the battlefield, a top-down dictatorship and clear command chain is preferred. It took the Battle of Scarif and then the Battle of Yavin to finally create some sort of unity amongst these rebels. Oddly enough, the Resistance was started during times of peace. It wasn't a reactionary movement, but a precautionary movement. The New Republic was in power and had only just won the Galactic Civil War a few decades earlier. Senator Princess General Leia had already pleaded her case with the Senate about the dangers of the First Order, but no one was really ready to listen to her. Meanwhile, the scandalous revelation that Darth Vader was her father had basically destroyed her political career, despite her role in sacrifices for the rebellion during the Galactic Civil War. The citizens of the New Republic would have viewed Vader as almost like the Heinrich Himmler of the Empire. The fact that Leia had not disclosed this information immediately after the war caused her and her entire family, including young Ben Solo, a lot of hardship. But still, the Resistance was a paramilitary organization, not quite illegal, but definitely not sanctioned by a functioning government. It'd be like if Winston Churchill in the late 1930s resigned from his position in Parliament and started a private militia in preparation for World War II to fight the Nazis. Winston Churchill would have been seen by Neville Chamberlain's faction within the Conservative Party as a war hawk and even a dangerous liability. Someone who could start an unnecessary war between the United Kingdom and Germany. Senator General Princess Leia and her Resistance were seen in a very similar way by a lot of the galaxy. To make matters worse, Princess Leia had plenty of friends within the New Republic Navy who were individually willing to give her intel, supplies, and even new recruits, further compromising the New Republic's neutrality. The rebellion was formed after decades of imperial rule, which drew up a long list of grievances from the inhabitants of the galaxy. The resistance were canaries in the coal mine preparing for some future war that most individuals didn't even believe could happen. And so the size of these two organizations was quite different. The rebellion, even in its earliest days, numbered in the thousands, if not more. After the Mon Calamari merchant navy rebelled against their imperial minders, the Rebel Alliance had a small but very formidable fleet. While the Battle of Hoth was disastrous for the Rebel Alliance, they still had an entire mid-rim offensive in progress which involved several dozen battle groups engaging the Empire on multiple fronts. Sure, losing the high command at Hoth would have been extremely detrimental to the war effort, but the rebellion had grown so large at this point that they were engaging the Empire in open, prolonged battle across the entire galaxy. The resistance, on the other hand, was pitifully small and all concentrated in one location, under one command. This was a huge problem, as we see during the evacuation of Dakar and the Battle of Crete. All the First Order had to do was destroy this one group, and the resistance would have been done for. When the rebels made a daring raid on the archival world of Scarif, the Empire was already spread thin across the galaxy. Their military had grown to preposterous proportions and had become stagnant and lazy and inefficient in their peacekeeping role. They had become predictable and a part of everyday life, their patterns and behaviors intimately known by the local inhabitants. Which was pretty bad because for the majority of the Galactic Civil War, the Empire was on the defensive against an invisible enemy that set fires and quickly disappeared into the night. The unfortunate truth that the Emperor was refusing to acknowledge was that the Galactic Empire's territory was far too large to protect, even for the Galactic Empire Navy. And so, like the German defenders in Normandy, who froze after grossly overestimating the amount of paratroopers dropped into their territory on the night before D-Day, the Empire also began circling their wagons and preparing a static defense on high-priority targets. Which, of course, the rebellion smartly avoided like a plague. Instead, they focused on soft and easy targets and slowly won a war of attrition against the Empire. And after destroying the first Death Star, the rebels already had momentum on their side. They had shown the galaxy that the Empire could be beaten, and they had a huge audience of disgruntled, underemployed, and underfed citizens who had been suffering under Imperial rule for 2 decades. The First Order, on the other hand, was in a completely different situation. By the time of the Battle of Starkiller Base, most people in the galaxy had never heard of these space fascists. Many had been too young to remember what it was like under Imperial rule. And the New Republic wasn't exactly the most popular government either. Almost 30 years after the destruction of the Empire, the Outer Rim was still heavily mired in poverty and crime. Pirates roamed the hyperspace lanes, the central government was bogged down by bureaucratic nonsense, and the Senate was locked in a partisan battle that focused more on political wins rather than actually solving the New Republic's many problems. When the First Order arrived, people weren't necessarily satisfied with the way things were going, and because the First Order was unknown, most people were undecided on how they viewed them, and some were even nostalgic about the days of the Empire and associated the First Order with a return to those glory days. This even included elected officials within the New Republic. And while the destruction of Alderaan infuriated the citizens of the galaxy and made many Imperials question their allegiance to the Empire, the destruction of Hazian Prime and its entire system stunned the galaxy and created a sense of fear and reluctance to help the Resistance or even be seen with them. After the Battle of Crete, Leia and her small group of survivors found it incredibly hard to convince anyone to give them aid. This was the exact effect that Tarkin wanted to achieve in the first place with the first Death Star, make the penalty for dissidents too high to pay. There are several reasons why the destruction of Hazian Prime had a much better effect than the destruction of Alderaan. For one, Alderaan was a peaceful planet and not involved in politics. Instead, it was a cultural and artistic center of the galaxy. If Coruscant was the brain of the Empire, Alderaan was supposed to be her heart. The destruction of this most important world was uncalled for and just added onto the long list of grievances people already had with the Empire. Hazian Prime, on the other hand, represented the home of the bureaucratic and inefficient New Republic. And so, while Hazian Prime's destruction was horrific, it was not mourned in the same way as Alderaan was. So in short, Alderaan really made people pissed off at the Empire, whereas Hazian Prime made people piss in their pants, showing us that where one urinates is equally as important as who they're urinating on. The First Order also had carried out a complete surprise attack and were still an unknown quantity, which made people even more reluctant to attract their attention, especially when rumors and propaganda began flowing in from both sides. Given the secretive nature of the First Order, no one knew what else they had in store for the galaxy. People were still very afraid that there was another Star Killer lurking somewhere in the unknown region. Now, when the Resistance began, the narrative had already been set in motion a long time ago. The Empire and the Rebels were all well known and their differences distinct and laid out in front of the citizens of the galaxy. During the First Order invasion, the narrative was being written as the battles were being fought, and so most people were still pretty much undecided about which side they supported unless they were already directly affected by one faction or another. The Resistance also found themselves severely lacking the same type of funding and equipment that the Rebellion had access to. Contrary to popular belief, the Rebellion was actually quite cash rich. Converting that money into war material was a whole nother issue because the Empire had basically complete domination and control over the military-industrial complex. The Resistance was able to buy any type of ship they could get their hands on, but had to rely more on secondhand ships because they were super poor. Its main fighter, the T-70 X-Wing, had been developed in the waning days of the Galactic Civil War and was already antiquated by the time of the First Order War. During the Galactic Civil War, however, the T-65B X-Wing and RZ-1A Wing were considered state-of-the-art and far superior to their Imperial counterparts. The Rebellion ships were uniquely selected to combat the Imperial fleet, which was made up of ridiculously large capital ships and short-range interceptors. The Resistance starfighters were evenly matched up against the First Order's upgraded TIE fighters. The First Order had been in the process of planning this invasion for several years, if not decades, and so when they struck the galaxy, they also quickly wiped out any allies or even potential allies that the Resistance could have. This meant taking out former rebel heroes, politicians, businessmen, anyone who was known to have an anti-First Order sentiment. This premature roundup of potential allies and sudden strike got closer to destroying the Resistance than the Empire ever did to destroying the Rebel Alliance. So as you can see, the Resistance is in a far worse situation than the Rebellion ever was. But let me know in the comment section down below what you think about my comparison between the Rebellion and the Resistance and what kind of challenges they face. Also, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. And as usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.